They nailed the sheriff's tongue first. Not to the wall, not to a post, but to his own desk, right atop the wanted posters bearing their grinning faces. It took 3 strikes of the hammer before Samuel Garrett stopped screaming, and by then, the 5 riders had already helped themselves to the whiskey behind the bar across the street. The town of Perdition Wells would remember August 14th, 1887, as the day hell came riding in on horseback. They called themselves La Muerte, the death, and for 3 blood-soaked years, they carved a trail of terror across the Arizona and New Mexico territories that made even the Apache wars seem civilized by comparison. But unlike the organized posses of Jesse James or the calculated robberies of Butch Cassidy, the Muerte Gang killed for the pure, unadulterated pleasure of watching the light fade from a man's eyes. At the center of this nightmare stood Vicente El Vibera Cordova, the man in the striped shirt with the bandana knotted at his throat like a noose waiting to happen. 26 years old with the dead eyes of a man 3 times his age, Vicente had earned his nickname, the Viper, not for his speed with a pistol, though he was faster than most, but for the way he struck, sudden, venomous, and always when you thought yourself safe. The story of how Vicente became what he was depended on, who was telling it. Some said his family was murdered by railroad men when he was 12, leaving him to die in the desert sun. Others claimed he had been born wrong, delivered by a midwife who swore the baby never cried, just stared at her with those black marble eyes until she had crossed herself and fled. The truth, as with most legends, was probably darker than either version. What was known for certain was this. By the time Vicente assembled his gang in the winter of 1884, he had already killed 17 men, 2 women, and allegedly a priest who had refused to give him sanctuary. The women's deaths were never spoken of in polite company, but the whispers in saloons told of cruelties that made hardened gunslingers blanch. His second in command was Jasper Thorne, the lean figure in black on the far left. An Englishman by birth, Jasper had come west after murdering his father with a letter opener over a gambling debt. He wore 2 gun belts with pearl-handled revolvers and was known to reload with such speed that witnesses swore he never stopped firing. Jasper had a peculiar habit of scalping his victims, not in the Indian fashion, but taking only a small patch above the left ear, which he would braid into his hatband. By the summer of 1887, that hatband was nearly full. To Vicente's immediate left stood William Billy Matches McCarty, so named for his preferred method of setting fire to buildings and the people inside them. Billy had been a simple farmhand once until his wife ran off with a land surveyor. Billy had tracked them to a hotel in Tucson, barred the doors from the outside, and lit it ablaze. 32 people died in that fire. Billy stood across the street watching until the walls collapsed, then simply mounted his horse and rode away. When Vicente found him 6 months later, Billy had perfected his craft. He could burn down a bank, a church, or a family home in under 4 minutes. The man in the white shirt, standing fourth in line, was known only as the Deacon. Nobody knew his real name, and he never spoke, not a word, not a sound. Some said his tongue had been cut out during the war. Others believed he had taken a vow of silence before descending into his current life of depravity. What made the Deacon truly terrifying was not his silence, but what he did with a knife. He could fillet a man alive, keeping him conscious and screaming for hours. In the town of Socorro, he had butchered the entire banking family, husband, wife, 3 children, and arranged them at the dinner table as if they were still enjoying their meal. The youngest child was 4 years old. Finally, on the far right stood Miguel Rios, the youngest at 19, but perhaps the most unhinged. Miguel had been a normal boy until a bout of scarlet fever at age 14 left him with violent seizures and a fractured mind. After one such episode, he had awakened to find he had strangled his younger sister with his bare hands. Rather than face justice, he had fled into the territories where Vicente found him and recognized a kindred darkness. Miguel's episodes grew more frequent and more violent, and Vicente learned to weaponize them, sending Miguel into towns ahead of the others to create chaos and confusion. The assault on Perdition Wells began at dawn, as most of their raids did. Vicente believed in giving people time to watch death approach, to feel their bowels loosen and their prayers dry up in their throats. The 5 riders appeared on the eastern ridge as the sun rose behind them, backlit like the 4 horsemen plus 1. They walked their horses slowly down Main Street, and the few early risers who saw them coming knew immediately what was about to happen. Old Man Pritchard, the blacksmith, dropped his hammer and ran for the church. Sally Hendricks, hanging laundry behind the general store, gathered her 3 children and hid them in the root cellar, pressing her hand over the baby's mouth when it started to cry. Sheriff Garrett emerged from his office with a coffee cup in one hand and his Winchester in the other. He was a good man, had been a ranger before settling in Perdition Wells, and he had killed 6 men in fair fights over his 30-year career. But nothing had prepared him for Vicente's smile as the outlaw dismounted. Vicente greeted him with a pleasant good morning, commenting on what a beautiful day it was for dying. The sheriff told them to turn around and ride on, that there was nothing for them here but rope. His voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. Vicente laughed, that dry rattle that sounded like bones in a bag, and told the sheriff that he was wrong. They had everything the gang needed. They had fear. They had blood. They had screams that would echo in these streets long after they were gone. That was when Jasper put a bullet through Garrett's knee, dropping him to the dirt. The Winchester clattered away, and before the sheriff could reach for his sidearm, the deacon was on him with that terrible knife. What they did to Sheriff Garrett took 20 minutes, and his screams brought people to their windows, then sent them scrambling to hide. When it was over, his body was dragged into his office, and that was when they nailed his tongue to the desk. A message to anyone who thought words like a law or justice meant anything in the face of La Muerte. The bank was next. Perdition Wells was a mining town, and the bank held the payroll for 3 separate operations. Vicente knew this because he made it his business to know. What he did not know, or did not care, was that the bank manager, Howard Sterling, had his entire family living in the apartment above. Billy Matches went to work on the bank's back door while the deacon kept watch. Miguel had already gone into one of his episodes, writhing in the street and speaking in tongues, which drew the curious and the foolish. Jasper picked off anyone who got too close, not killing shots, but wounds that would make them suffer. He shot Thomas Reardon through the jaw. He shot Mary Palmer through the stomach. He shot young Danny Wu in both knees. They lay in the street, bleeding and moaning, and when their families tried to help them, Jasper would fire near their heads, making them dance back. Inside the bank, Vicente found Howard Sterling trying to hide his wife and 2 daughters in the vault. The look on Sterling's face when Vicente appeared in the doorway was one that the outlaw would savor for years, that dawning realization that no amount of pleading or praying would change what was about to happen. Sterling begged them to take the money, to take everything, to just let his family go. Vicente considered this for a moment, his head tilted like a curious dog. Then he shot Sterling through the right eye. The screaming that followed brought Billy running up the stairs, and together they herded Mrs. Sterling and the 2 girls, ages 12 and 9, back down into the main floor of the bank. What happened next was spoken of only in whispers, even years later. Survivors who watched through gaps in boarded windows said the screaming went on for nearly an hour. When the Muerte Gang finally emerged, their clothes were soaked with blood. and they were carrying bags of money and jewelry torn from the victims. But Vicente was not finished with Perdition Wells. He never was after just one atrocity. That was the pattern the army had identified. After tracking the gang for 2 years, a town was not just robbed, it was broken, systematically, viciously broken, until the survivors would abandon it completely within months. Unable to live with the memories soaked into every building, they hit the church next. Father Benedict was 73 years old and had been the spiritual shepherd of Perdition Wells for 20 years. He was hearing confession from Emma Hartley when the doors burst open. The deacon dragged Emma out by her hair, her screams echoing off the vaulted ceiling while Vicente approached the confessional. Vicente told the priest he had sins to confess. What followed was a perverse mockery of the sacrament, with Vicente listing every murder, every act of torture, every moment of cruelty in excruciating detail while Father Benedict wept. When Vicente was finished, he asked for absolution. The priest sobbed that he could not give it, that Vicente must repent, must truly repent. Vicente's voice became soft as silk as he told the father that he did repent. He repented that he had not killed more, that he had not made more people suffer, that there were still towns he had not visited. He asked if that counted. Then he shot Father Benedict through the mouth, the bullet punching out the back of his skull and embedding itself in the carved wooden crucifix behind him. By noon, 13 people were dead, and 24 more were wounded. The Muerte Gang gathered their loot and their horses, preparing to ride out. But Vicente had one more bit of theater to perform. He had Miguel drag every body into the center of Main Street and pile them together. Men, women, the Sterling girls, Father Benedict, Sheriff Garrett. Then Billy Matches poured kerosene over the pile. Vicente shouted for everyone to come out and see what happens to places that have sheriffs, that have laws, that think they are safe. Slowly, terrified faces appeared in windows and doorways. Vicente wanted an audience for this final indignity. He told them they would rebuild. They would bury these people. They would bring in a new sheriff, but they would never forget. Every time they walked these streets, they would see this. They would smell it. They would hear the screams in their sleep. And they would know that the gang might come back. Any day, any night. La Muerte never stopped riding. Then Billy lit the match. The 5 riders left Perdition Wells with the smoke of burning flesh darkening the sky behind them. They rode south toward Mexico, laughing and passing a bottle of stolen whiskey between them. They had $40,000 in cash and gold, enough to live like kings for months. But Vicente was already thinking about the next town, the next bank, the next batch of screams to add to his collection. The Muerte Gang's reign of terror would continue for another 8 months. They hit 6 more towns, leaving a combined death toll of 63, with countless others wounded or driven mad. The territorial governor put a bounty of $10,000 on Vicente's head, $5,000 for each of the others. Posses were formed and quickly disbanded after encountering the gang's brutality. The army was called in, but Vicente knew the territories better than any soldier, and he slipped through their fingers like smoke. It was not law or justice that finally ended La Muerte. It was simple betrayal and one man's need for revenge. Miguel Rios, during one of his seizures in a brothel in Las Cruces, killed one of the girls. She was 16 years old and her name was Consuela. Her brother Rodrigo was a vaquero who knew the desert as well as Vicente did. When he learned what had happened, he did not go to the law. He went hunting. Rodrigo tracked the gang for 3 weeks before he found their camp in the Gila wilderness. He waited until they were drunk and sleeping. Then he went to work. He slit Miguel's throat first, then Billy's. He shot Jasper through both eyes as the Englishman woke and reached for his guns. The deacon actually managed to draw his knife, but Rodrigo was faster, putting 5 bullets in his chest. Vicente woke to find himself alone with Rodrigo and 4 corpses. Rodrigo told him that Vicente did not remember her, that he had killed so many he did not even remember Consuela. Vicente, to his credit, did not beg. He had lived by violence and knew he would die by it. He asked Rodrigo to make it quick. Rodrigo smiled and asked if Vicente had made it quick for all those people. No, he told the outlaw. Vicente would get to know what he had given to others. What Rodrigo did to Vicente over the next 3 days was never fully recorded. He delivered what remained to the sheriff in Silver City in a canvas sack. The sheriff took one look inside and vomited. Vicente was still barely alive, and it took him another day to die, screaming without a tongue, blind and missing most of his fingers and toes. The newspapers called it justice. Rodrigo called it insufficient. He rode back into Mexico and was never heard from again. Perdition Wells never recovered. Within a year, it was a ghost town. The buildings still stand today, weathered and empty, and locals say you can still smell smoke on certain nights, still hear screaming when the wind blows down Main Street. Perhaps it is just legend. Perhaps it is guilt, manifesting as shared hallucination. Or perhaps some evil is so profound that it leaves a permanent scar on the earth itself, a wound that never quite heals. The Muerte Gang rode for only 3 years, but the darkness they left behind lasted generations. And on quiet nights in the territories, old-timers still tell stories about the 5 riders and the trail of blood they left across the West. A reminder that the worst monsters do not hide in shadows. They ride in broad daylight smiling, and they wear human faces,